for the course, the Pre-Purchase 2 Advanced Housing Counseling, and this unit has to do with establishing performance standards. In your manuals, this will start on page 255, so I do encourage you to go ahead and follow along in your manuals. So for Unit 9, we'll be talking about establishing performance standards. We'll be talking about reporting requirements. We'll go over professional development and training opportunities, and we'll also talk about counseling industry guidelines in this section. So let's start first with a discussion of level classifications for agencies. So this discussion starts on page 255 in your manuals. So NCLR developed a way to assign different levels or classifications to agencies depending on their production and their quality. So we'll take a look at that and talk about the different classifications. And going through the classification, regardless of where you start, you can either go up or down in the classification. So, you know, typically we would see someone go from a level 1 to a level 2 to a level 3, but it's always possible that someone could slide back from a 3, say, to a 2. So that's definitely possible. The agency's ability to improve their production and to, you know, improve their staffing or their staff experiences would allow them to move from a 1 to a 2 or a 3, and it's also going to increase funding opportunities for them. So let's start by looking at the classification system. The discussion starts on page 255, and this just goes over the developmental stages of a housing counseling agency from, you know, the very beginning, from inception to how do they achieve maximum efficiency and output. On page 256, let's take a look at the different levels that are identified here. So let's start with level 1. So what would we find with a level 1 agency? Well, you're going to find that they don't have a lot of years of experience. So, you know, less than 2 years, probably only been operating for a year or two as far as operating the housing counseling program. The staff structure, you might even just have one counselor, but you should have at least one full-time counselor and at least a part-time manager. There's a lot of differences here as far as how the manager might interact with the housing counseling program. Sometimes the manager is not really heavily involved in the program. Frequently, what I have seen with these level 1 agencies is that the housing counselor is kind of doing it all. The manager is in charge, but they're probably in charge of a lot of different programs. So it's really just going to depend whether or not your agency decides that the manager should be fully engaged in the process of the actual counseling. The counselor is going to have very likely limited counseling experience and could even be new to how do you do structured counseling. So with a level 1 agency, they really are just starting out. Other things that are going to be common for a level 1 agency is that they're probably just getting started using a client management system. So client management system just means, you know, what database are they using to capture their information? Is it Counselor Max? Is it HCO? Is it a private CMS? So whatever they decide to use for their database, they're going to be learning how to use that and how to enter the information. At this point, the local community may not know a whole lot about the program that's being offered. So at this point, they haven't even really done any networking or advertising or even gotten the word out at all that the agency is available. So this means, of course, they probably are not going to have very many clients at this stage. They may only have a couple funders. So they may not have a lot of sources of revenue. In fact, they may just be paying for this housing counseling program through their general operating fund. So in that case, they've only got one funder. Maybe they're not even getting HUD funds yet at this stage. Moving on to a level 2. So at this point, they've got maybe 2 to 3 years worth of experience operating the housing counseling program. So they've got a little bit of a start on it. They're going to have 1 or maybe even 2 full-time counselors. They're still going to have a manager. That manager might still be full-time or part-time. and they still may or may not be fully engaged with the actual housing counseling process, but hopefully they've got an executive director that is engaged and supportive of the program. At this point with the level 2, they might even have a part-time intake person, or they might use an intern for that, that particular position. But that's going to help the counselor because now they're getting a little busier, they've been around longer, they're probably seeing more clients. So at this stage, it might be appropriate to go ahead and add a part-time intake person to help with scheduling and that type of thing. Hopefully, they're in the process of becoming HUD certified. And at level 2, we would like that at least one counselor is actually certified. So they will have, at that point, if they only have one counselor, at least certified that counselor. Not only are they getting used to using the CMS, but at a level 2 stage, they are consistently using it. They understand what information has to be documented and that they're inputting all the particular data points that have to be collected. It's always a challenge, and you always have sometimes discussions about, well, I do it this way or I do it that way. The important thing really is to be consistent and just to make an agreement. Well, if we all do it this way, we at least are going to have accurate information. So it's really important to keep communication open if you build staff, because now you no longer have just one person doing it. So if you've added a counselor, you want to make sure both counselors are collecting the same information. You probably are getting the word out that you're available in the community. So you've done a little more networking. You've got more sources of referrals, so you're getting busier as far as how many clients you're seeing. And hopefully you have built some other funding sources. Maybe you now are doing pre-purchase counseling, and so you have a lender who's willing to help fund for part of that program. So hopefully you've expanded and diversified your funding sources. So a level 3 agency has been operating for at least 3 years. They have 2 full-time counselors, a full-time assistant, and a full-time manager. So now we're talking about 4 different employees to get the work done. All of the counselors are certified. They are consistently using the client management system and collecting information in the same way. So all members of the staff are using the client management system to the best of its ability. They also have now gotten established in the community, because if they've been around at least 3 years, they should have some success stories and such that they can share. So at this point, you're getting a lot more referrals from a lot of different sources. And at this level, you would be expected to have at least 9 active funders. So let's move on to a discussion here about, how do you make sure that you're providing good service, that you're tracking the service that you're providing, and how do you monitor your volume? So this starts on page 257 of your book. So if we look at performance standards for a full-time counselor, one counselor should have the following goals. So if the counselor, and there's differences depending on what type of counseling they're doing, okay? So this is going to be for a counselor who hopefully is providing long-term service. So you're meeting with these clients start to finish, and you're doing comprehensive counseling. So hopefully you're doing everything from pre-purchase to foreclosure. So if you look in your manuals at page 260, you'll see some information listed here and a good breakdown if you're trying to set up established goals for the agency. So you can see that the goals of the agency are going to be different based on what type of counseling you're doing. So for instance, if you look for a pre-purchase counselor, the annual goal would be for them to service 300 cases. So if you break that down, that would be 75 cases quarterly, or if you break it down further, 25 cases a month or 6 a week. So this is a good way to really break down how many cases are you expected to take, how many clients are you expected to serve. So this would apply for post-purchase rental, HECM, reverse mortgage, or homeless counseling. Now, if someone is doing a mixture of services and they're also doing foreclosure counseling, if you look at that middle section, now the number is a little less. It would be 225 to 300. So maybe they're only doing 5 cases a week if they're also doing foreclosure counseling, because that does tend to be more time intensive. If they're only doing foreclosure counseling, a lot of it's really going to depend on their level of experience. So an experienced counselor may still be able to handle 5 or 6 cases a week. Even though they're more time intensive, you're consistently doing the same type of cases. So theoretically, you'll be able to streamline a lot of your services and become familiar with how to provide those services. Tracking your follow-up services is really important. So let's go ahead and discuss about that. First of all, it's important because guess what? HUD requires it. So not only is it important and helpful, but we have to do it anyway. So what does HUD require and what does follow-up mean? Well, HUD's definition of follow-up activity means that you have to touch a file every 60 days. So you've got to at least attempt to reach out with the client and document that activity every 60 days, or the file is no longer considered active. Now, you should allow time and build time in your schedule for doing follow-up activities. Hopefully, it would be the counselor who's doing follow-up, but sometimes it is support staff. If it's just simply a matter of, hey, you missed an appointment, we'd like to get you back in here, you could have a support staff or an intake person who's taking care of that. But it is important to build time into the schedule to allow that, because if you don't build in time for follow-up, it tends to not get done. And then you're going to be in trouble when it comes time for your HUD audit, because now you're not in compliance with the HUD guidelines, which say you've got to document and touch a client every 60 days. So one of the biggest problems that counselors face is if you're seeing 300 cases a year, it can be difficult to really manage where everybody is in the pipeline. So it's hard to know if somebody's just beginning the process, if they are, they've been in counseling for 6 months. So consistently having some type of a system to do your follow-up is really what we have found that's going to be most important. Because if you just rely on, kind of randomly assessing your files, you're not going to have any system, and it's just simply not going to get done. Clients are going to fall through the cracks. They're not going to come back. You're not going to be able to close out their files, and you're certainly not going to get those success stories. Because if you don't have a consistent follow-up system, if the clients aren't contacting you, you're not going to be contacting them. So establishing, either a scheduled time for doing your follow-up or some sort of a system for making sure it's done. Your client management system is going to give you the ability to set those follow-up triggers. So just make sure you set them in the system, and then when you see those reminders come up, you follow through. So an example, if we look at a pre-purchase counseling setup, for pre-purchase counseling, let's look at how you might do your follow-up system. And if you look in your manual, this is actually listed on page 265. So this would be kind of a rainbow system. So let's talk about the different colors and what they mean. So red would be a case that is, boom, mortgage ready. Orange would be they're getting close, but they still are not mortgage ready, but we expect them to be mortgage ready within 90 days. Yellow is going to be someone that you expect to be mortgage ready between 90 and 180 days. So they're not within 90 days, but they're really not further out than 180 days. And this could be because maybe they still have bills that they're trying to pay off, or they're still trying to save for a down payment, but they still have a little time that's involved. Green might be somebody who's kind of in the process for a while. So we know that it's going to take them, 6 months in order to attain their goals because they want to increase their income, for instance. So this would be someone who's in a longer term situation, lasting longer than 180 days. You're also going to have a code for blue files. And these are clients who have either dropped out of the service or just continued pursuing the program. So you want to have a status for that too. So if we look at the system for how you might set it up to do the follow-up, this is how it might look. And again, this is in your book if you want to try and set it up at your agency. So if we look at the follow-up, as you can imagine, most clients are going to fall into the category of yellow and green. And actually, these clients are going to need less follow-up by the counselor because yellow and green means that they are still doing a lot of work on their own. Clients assigned as yellow, which remember yellow would be the 90 to 180 days out, or green, which would be longer than 180 days, really only need to be contacted once a month. So at that point, they should have their action plan. They should know what they need to be working on. So touching those files once a month would certainly be appropriate. Now, the clients that are in the first two categories are the ones that really are going to need more frequent follow-up. So if they are within 90 days, if they are orange, they're going to need to be contacted every other week because they're closer to closing, right? But in most cases, they still could potentially only be contacted once a month. The clients that are assigned as red, hey, they're ready to enter into a mortgage contract, they really should be contacted weekly because they potentially could go to closing anytime. So this is just an example of how you might set up your weeks to make sure that you're rotating through all your files and you're assigning the most time to the red files because they're the clients who need to be contacted weekly. So if you look at week 1, half of the red files get worked on Monday, the other half get worked on Wednesday. Okay, same thing Monday and Wednesday, you're dividing up your red files. And then you don't need as much time for the green, the yellow, and the orange files. Setting up a weekly schedule can really help your stress level, it can help your productivity, and it definitely helps you set up a workable system. So you look at pages 268 and 269, and we've given you an example here, and I'll go through it here in just a second. But the calendar that we've given you the example of really breaks down the events that a counselor has to do each week. And so that way they're using this block scheduling to try and get the maximum time out of their week. So this, you'd have to work a little differently with new and experienced counselors, but it could work with either one. It also could work whether or not you have support staff. So if you don't have support staff, you're just going to want to build more time in for scheduling and follow-up calls and things like that. So if we look at this Monday through Friday schedule, and again, this is in your manuals on page 268, you can see that we've got time allotted to clients coming in. So that would be the client number 1 with brackets saying new. So in this case, you want to allow an hour for a client to come in, perhaps for the active counseling, and then you've got that scheduled so you know from 9 to 10, that's when I take my new cases. Okay. You've also got time set up between 10 and 11 to do your follow-up for existing clients and make sure that you've got everything updated in your CMS. You, of course, want to build time in for lunch and time to return your calls and do your emails. So this type of block scheduling really just helps you stay consistent and up to date on your work. And you'll notice that the very last thing on Friday at the end is prepare for the next week. So make a plan for the following week so when you come in on Monday, you know how you're going to go ahead and start your day. Now, a couple other things to help you manage client flow. So if you've got additional questions, be thinking about what would help you kind of handle your files efficiently. Well, one thing that would help is before you have the appointment, before you walk that client into your door and sit them down across from your desk, take a look at their file. Prepare yourself. Make sure you're familiar with everything that's included so you know what needs to be accomplished during that appointment. So prep for the appointment prior to actually starting it with the client. It's also going to be important after the counseling session to mark your triggers for follow-up. So you've got to be following up at least once a month. That's, depending on the client situation, even if it's just a quick phone call, you want to do the follow-up, and you also want to document it. Don't forget to document everything in the client management system. Every phone call, every time that you talk with a client, you want to be sure that you've recorded it. So make sure that you're doing all of your follow-up that's required. You're also at this point going to have files that you're closing. So, and that might be because they're a success story. If it's pre-purchase counseling, they went to closing. If it's foreclosure intervention work, you got an accurate workout plan. So closing the files is a necessary part of what we do. It's also okay to close those files if you've got a dead client. A client who's not moving forward, that file is dead. There is nothing else that you can do. If you're giving them an action plan and they're not following through, it's perfectly appropriate, and HUD allows us to close those files if the client is being non-compliant. So this is why I said when you look at that color coding system, those blue files are the ones that you're saying those clients are dead, they're not moving forward. That's a closed case, and you're going to want to be sure and close it out in your CMS as well. Moving on to a discussion about reporting. Really the key to reporting, I will tell you, is use your operating system to the best of its ability. Whatever management system you're using, whether it's Counselor Max or HCO, whatever CMS you're using is going to do the work for you if you properly use it. So you want to make sure that you're keeping track of all the different types of counseling that you're doing, and that you're keeping track of the number of appointments, because this is going to help you run your reports. And when you go to apply for funding, you'll have the numbers there to demonstrate, here's what we've already done, here's what our projections are. So using that client management system is really going to be critical. Well, you've all heard, junk in, junk out. So you've got to make sure that you've got accurate information going into the system. Because guess what? All that information feeds into all of the work that the agency does. So you're going to be using that documentation and that client management system to file reports with management, with your board, with the funders. When you apply for a funding stream, they're going to want to know, what have you accomplished so far? You're also going to be using those reports for any outreach that you're doing. And it still comes back to funding. If you're applying for HUD grants or other grants or program development, it really all is interrelated. So it's really important to make sure you have accurate information going into that system. Now, when should counselors use their client management system? Well, as you can imagine, every day. If you forget to do it, it may not ever get done. So, and I would tell you not just every day, after every appointment. Don't wait until the end of the day and when you're rushed and you're ready to get out of there and enter all your information. Take time after every appointment to go ahead and document everything. You're going to want to make sure that every call you make, just like we have here, whether it's outreach or intake, everything is documented there. You can use the scheduling system and the ability to schedule everything. You can schedule your follow-up calls. Use that client management system. If you're doing classes, you can use that for registration. This is also how you're going to assign your HUD numbers to every file, because HUD does require that every file has a unique identifying case number. You'll have the ability to do all your reminders and your calendars in there, schedule your meetings. So really everything is going to be able to go into that client management system. And the client management system that you use, like I said, whether it's a private one or HCO or Counselor Max, learn to use the tools that are included there. You do not have to manually calculate ratios and affordability. You're going to have a way to use your client management system to do that. As long as you enter the numbers, it'll do the calculations for you. So just take some time to really learn it. You might even have one person at your agency that's kind of the self-appointed expert, and so they do, weekly trainings just to make sure everybody's using it to the full ability. So that client management system can really make life easy if you take the time to learn about it and prepare and use it to the best of its capacity. I want to mention a couple things on professional development, because this is also a really important piece of the work that we do in housing counseling. We definitely should take advantage of training opportunities. It's a chance to get fresh, new information, maybe new perspectives. It's also a chance to network and find out what other agencies are doing in your area. If you have local or state meetings, you can talk about, what's different for your area. Maybe you've got different guidelines or different things that have recently started. You've got a new initiative that came out in your area. So it's really going to help you stay on top of those changes in the industry. You're also going to know if there's some legal issues you need to know about. If there's something going on in the industry, this is your chance, if you go to the trainings and you network, to really keep up on all the new information. And also, you're going to know about opportunities. Because when you talk with other agencies, you might find out that, hey, they just started this particular program and maybe you need to look into it for your area. So you're going to get a lot of good information and networking opportunities when you go to the trainings. Don't forget how important it is to take a step back and help those new staff members. Everybody was a new counselor at one point, and so they're going to need our guidance. So make sure that, first of all, you set a good example and that you help them, share them, talk with them about your process, help them learn by showing them how you've managed to set things up for your particular workflow. Teamwork, right? Productive teamwork requires good leadership, clear communication, firmly established roles, and conflict resolution. I would say all of these are important, but one of the really important things is to know established roles, because there seems to be a lot of sometimes tension at an agency if you don't really know who's doing what. And just because something needs to get done and one person always does it, doesn't mean that that's supposed to be their responsibility. So that can lead to tension. So you want to make sure that you have reviews and you talk about these issues and you have teamwork mentality so that we all have this common goal and we need to work together to accomplish it. Communication was one of the things we just mentioned and how important it is to having an effective team. So make sure that you're listening to not just your clients, because we're usually really good at that, but also listening to other staff members and being flexible and open to change. That can be a real challenge in the housing counseling industry because we are constantly faced with change. It's just something that's going to happen all the time with the nature of our industry. So we've got to be flexible, and just because we've always done it that way doesn't mean that's going to continue to be the best way to do it or even the way that we can do it. So just try and maintain a positive attitude and be patient and constructive with the rest of the team. Facilitating that open communication is really important among all levels of an agency just to work effectively as a team. I do want to have a couple comments here about stress management. Let's face it, we work in a really high-stress industry. So keep in mind that, keeping your sanity is really important. And when you find that you're getting stressed out, just a couple suggestions, and you'll know what works for you. But first of all, slow down. You might have to take a break and get your perspective and maybe just do a routine task. I worked at an agency one time, and there was one of the counselors there that I always knew when she was having a crazy day because she would go in and assemble packets. That was kind of her thoughtless, it was just a routine thing that she could do without thinking. And I always knew, like, oh, she's had a rough day. She's doing that as kind of a stress reliever. So do a different type of thing, update your files, do your filing, catch up on your filing. Do something like that, and that'll help you. Move around the office, just the physical act of getting up and walking down the hall or going outside can really help you. And then the last note here is don't be afraid to ask for help. All of us have been there and we understand. So if you really get to the point where you're feeling overwhelmed, let your coworkers know, let your management know, and don't be afraid to ask for some help. Don't forget about just kind of these basics: eat right, sleep right, get some exercise, because all of these things also affect your work life. If you're not sleeping, you're going to not function well at work. You're going to feel better if you're eating a good diet, if you're exercising. So these things also make a difference in, how well we're coping with everything. So this is just going to, following general good living guidelines is also going to help you do your work as a counselor. A couple thoughts on staying organized, because this does really seem to be a challenge in the work that we do, because we do have a lot of paperwork we have to deal with. So, the suggestions here would be useful for you. Make sure that you do always have a space to work that's clear, so you don't want piles of paper everywhere. You certainly can't do that if you have clients coming in, because most of it's going to be confidential information, right? So make sure that you have a clean, organized work area. Do your block scheduling. so you have time for your emails and your phone calls, and that way you're not constantly, interrupted by the ping of an email. So do your block scheduling so you say, here's my half an hour to deal with my email, then I'm going to go back to getting this work done. One thing that can be helpful, and that I have had a lot of counselors report has been really successful for them, is that before they leave for the day, they kind of do some organization. So, and it doesn't take that long, but before you walk out of the office, make a short list. Okay, tomorrow when I walk in here, boom, here's the 5 things that I know I need to accomplish. And that way the next day, you're not having to kind of refresh, okay, what was yesterday? What did I do? What do I have to start with today? So it can really help you kind of start each day in an organized manner. Now the last thing we're going to go over in this class, and this is the final piece of Section 9, is really just to talk about, what are the gold standards for counseling? So the housing counseling industry does have some standards that have been established, and these will start on page 279. So again, I'm going to go through them briefly, but I would encourage you to read these independently. So this is the housing counseling industry standards, and it was developed back in 2007. All the industry stakeholders got together, counseling agencies, lenders, HUD. So these were developed so that agencies had a little more direction than just what HUD gives us. So for instance, pre-purchase counseling, we have some very broad direction from HUD, but we really don't have specifics on, well, what do we really need to include for pre-purchase counseling? So these industry standards gave us very detailed core operating standards for all the different types of counseling. So it's really helpful to use this as your guide to making sure that you're doing the best job counseling. This course and all the courses established by NHNLA use not only the HUD counseling requirements, but also the housing counseling industry standards. So you know that if you do everything that we talk about in these courses, you are following the best practices and you are going to be in compliance with those homeownership standards. So you can actually go to the website. We've got these included in your book, but you've also got helpful information. You can go to homeownershipstandards.com, and this is also where you can commit to honor these standards and go ahead and sign up to accept those and say that you're going to follow those and pledge to make sure that they're a part of your core operating industry practices. So those are available at homeownershipstandards.com. So this will conclude Unit 9, but again, there's important information there that you want to take a look at other than just going over the review here. So be sure you take the time to do that. Thank you.